Okay, hello grade 9s and welcome to your first online lesson. Today we're going to be doing your sixth poem, which is Throwing a Tree by Thomas Hardy. This is in your term 1 poetry pack and it's on page 6. It's your sixth poem. So you need to open up in your notes. You have already got it. We're going to quickly go through it so that you can answer those questions and catch up and cover what we need to do for this term. Alright, so as per usual, I'm going to run my lessons like we would usually run our classroom lessons. So if at any point you are not with me, please pause the video, rewind it a little bit and catch up wherever you've maybe missed. Okay, and if you have any questions, you guys have me on WhatsApp. You can send me a message and I'll answer you as best as I possibly can. Okay. As usual, in our classroom, we usually read through the poem at least twice. The first time, we get an overall feeling for the poem and what it's about. And the second one is when we go through it line by line and do an analysis on each piece. Okay, so Throwing a Tree by Thomas Hardy. The two executioners stalked along over the knolls, bearing two axes with heavy heads, shining and wide, and a long-limbed two-handed saw, toothed for cutting great bowls. And so they approached the proud tree and that bears the death mark on its side. Jackets are doffed, they swing axes and chop away just above the ground, and the chips fly about and lie white on the moss and fallen leaves, till a broad deep gash in the bark is hewn all the way around. And one of them tries to hook upward a rope, which at last he achieves. The saw then begins till the top of the tall giant shivers. The shivers are seen to grow greater with each cut than before. They edge out the saw, tug the rope, but the tree only quivers. And kneeling and sawing again, they step back to try pull once more. Then lastly, the living mast sways, further sways, with a shout. Job like Ike rush aside, ready the end of its long staying powers. The tree crashes downwards. It shakes all its neighbors throughout, and 200 years steady growth has been ended in less than 2 hours. Alright, so overall idea of the poem, Thomas Hardy, our poet, is talking about how these people, he's comparing the people who are cutting down these trees, or this particular tree, he's comparing them to executioners. Executioners would be a person that when you get sentenced to death, your executioner would be the one that actually kills you. Okay, so it's talking about how it's talking about how nature is being murdered by people and how unintentionally and sometimes unknowingly we are destroying nature, which helps to sustain us. Okay, so if you haven't already, please number your lines so that we can go through it line by line. Firstly, before we go into it, we've got the title, which is very important. It says Throwing a Tree, not cutting, not chopping down a tree. It says throwing. The word throwing, and we've spoken about the importance of diction in class. Diction, why your poet chooses to use certain words, what images, what thoughts, what connotations is your poet busy giving by using certain words. By using the word throwing, we think about things like throwing away trash, throwing away things that don't matter or are not important, are not worthy, or things that are useless. And then a tree being useless seems very strange. In common knowledge, we know that trees do so much for us. And if you do your bit of research that you've done in geography, when you're talking about deforestation, you know just how much the trees are doing for the environment. So linking those two words, throwing a tree, it's very strange and it's very eye-catching because it's implying that trees are as useless as trash that we'd throw away, where we know in reality it's not. So your poet is highlighting that unusual comparison All right, and Thomas Hardy, again, a very important poet that you will see in the upcoming years. All right, stanza 1, line 1. The two executioners stalk along over the knolls. The two executioners means the people who would kill. And again, the importance why your poet has used the word executioners rather than tree cutters. What is he trying to tell us? He's trying to, again, highlight the fact that these people who are chopping down the trees are being compared to murderers, executioners. Stalks means to follow. And again, you've got negative connotations to it. You've got bad feelings towards stalking. Okay, stalking opposed to something like following. Stalking gives you bad feelings. It gives you that danger. If you think about the word stalking, what does it bring out for you? What do those connotations make you think about? And you'll notice that most of those are negative. So they stalk along over the knolls. Knolls are small round hills. Okay, so these two executioners are stalking, they're walking, they're following something or someone over the small round mountains. Line 2, bearing two axes with heavy heads, shining and wide. Okay, so each of the people, each of these executioners are carrying, bearing means carrying, are bearing two axes with heavy heads. An axe, the thing that the instrument or the tool that a woodcutter would be using in order to chop down the trees. Okay, and those axes have got very big heads. The top part that cuts the tree, the silver, the metal piece, it's a very big head and it's shining. Okay, shining, so you get the ideas that it's been sharpened. It's a very big one. Where it talks about wide in this line, it's talking about it being very big, able to cut down very big trees. If you're using a very small axe, it would have to be to cut down very small trees or small things. Whereas here, they're wanting to cut down massive trees. So you must imagine how big those axes would have to be, or at least the heads of the axes. Line 3. And a long, limp, two-handed saw, toothed for cutting great holes. The long-limbed means it's got a very long arm to it. Sorry, and a long limp. Okay, limp means it doesn't move easily and it needs assistance in order to move. Okay, long-limbed, two-handed saw. Okay, so a saw that needs you to use both your hands and it cannot move on its own. We're thinking about a electric saw, okay, or a chainsaw, that it doesn't move on its own. It's mechanical. Okay, you're going to need both hands in order to move it, or you're going to it's going to be very big. And a long, limp, two-handed saw, toothed for cutting great boles. Boles would be the tree trunk, or the trunk of the tree, the wood section that goes up before you reach all the splitting branches. Okay, and when it talks about teeth, it's talking about the edges. If you think of a knife, the edges of that sharp knife would be the teeth. Okay, so if you have a look at a knife, okay, all of these would be considered the teeth. Now, if you imagine those teeth in a chainsaw, you can imagine why it would be cutting, why it would be necessary. It's like cutting a loaf of bread with a blunt knife. Okay, it needs to have those teeth in order to get that traction and cut down the tree. And again, if it's got very big teeth, it's going to do a lot of damage. Line 4. And so they approach the proud tree that bears the death mark on its side. Okay, and so they approach, and so they go closer to the tree. They call it a proud tree. And again, if you think about those connotations of proud, you think of admirable, things that you'd admire. If you think of a tree that you'd admire, would probably be things like tall, mighty, old. Okay, so this tree needs to be very big, very strong, probably pretty old. And when it says in line 4 that bears the death mark on its side, it's giving you that imagery of like a person who on their side, they've got like a mark on them, saying that they're the one that's destined to die. They're giving that imagery to the tree, so human imagery to a tree. It's not direct personification, so don't confuse it, okay? But it is very clear imagery. It's almost as if someone's walked past and drawn a big cross onto that tree, or a cross onto a person, like they would in the old days, that have drawn a big cross on a person, and that's the one that's going to be executed, or in this poem, the tree that's going to be cut down. Second stanza, line 5. Jackets doffed. In other words, they've taken off their jackets. Doffed means removed. Okay, jackets removed. They swing their axes and chop away just above the ground. All right, so very close to the ground, they're going to try and chop the tree down as close to the ground as they can get it. They're probably cutting down the tree because they want the wood, so they try and chop it as low to the ground as possible to get as much wood as possible. Line 6, and the chips fly about and lie white on the moss and fallen leaves. Okay, the chips that they're talking about there, they're the little wooden flakes that are falling off or being scattered away from the tree as the men are busy cutting, as these murderers are busy cutting away at the tree. All of these little white pieces from the tree are falling onto the floor. The floor is covered in moss and fallen leaves. And it talks about it being white. Those little flakes of wood are white. They're very raw. And if we think about the connotations about white, we think of things like pure, we think of things like innocent. So the tree is innocent. The tree is pure. The idea that the tree has done nothing to deserve to be executed. Yet here we are as humans cutting them down. Line 7. Till a broad, deep gash. Okay, a gash is a cut. So they're chopping away until they can see this big, deep cut in the tree. In the bark is hewn. Hewn means to be created all the way around. So on the tree, they've cut this big cut all the way around the tree so that obviously they can try and take the tree down. And it's a huge cut. Talks about it being a broad, deep gash. Okay, and that is a personification example. And one of them tries to hook upward a rope. So one of these two wood cutters or tree cutters are going to now throw a rope around the top piece of the tree, obviously so that they can then pull that tree down again, which at last he achieves. So it took a couple of tries of trying to throw this rope around the tree before he finally got it right. Stanza 3, line 9. He saw then begins. So they're using the saw now. Rather than the axes, they're now going to use the chainsaw we spoke about. And they're going to try and cut this tree. So using the chainsaw, till the top of the tall giant shivers. There's a metaphor there. They're comparing this huge tree to being a tall giant. Again, not moving, strong, powerful, like we could imagine a giant would be. Okay? So they're going to use this chainsaw to chop away or to cut away at the tree until the tree starts to shiver. And if you think about when humans shiver, we shake. So until the tree starts to shake. And that shivers is another example of your personification. It's giving the tree the human quality of shivering. Remember, not only humans shiver, but it's a very common person or human quality. Therefore, we can say it is an example of personification. Line 10. The shivers are seen to grow greater. So these shivers, which we understand to be the shaking of the tree as it's being weakened by the chainsaw, the shaking of the tree is getting more pronounced. It's shaking bigger, or the shakes are bigger. They grow greater with each cut than before. So with every cut that these wood cutters or tree cutters are busy doing on the tree, for every cut they make, the shaking of the tree and the shivers of the tree get bigger as the tree gets weakened. Line 12, and kneeling on their knees and sawing again. So again, they're using their chainsaw to try and chop down the tree. They step back and try pulling once more. End of that stanza, end of third stanza. They once again take a step back and they're pulling on those ropes we spoke about, the one that they threw around the tree. They're going to try and pull that tree down again. Mommy. Stanza 4. Then lastly, come on, Key. Okay, have you finished it? Sorry. Then lastly, the living mast stays. Living means alive. Very, very highly contrasted. And again, if you look at the diction, you're talking about how the tree was living. Hey, baby. How the tree was living, but now it's not going to be living anymore. And a mast would be a tall pole or a tall upright post to add structure. If you think like in the on the ships, you'd have a tall mast that everything else is put onto. So it would be the ones that has all the screens and that onto them. Or you could think of like a pole, a flag pole. Has to be very strong if you think of the connotations. Has to be very strong. Has to be very sturdy. Not easily going to be broken. Let's read that line again. Then lastly, the living mast, this tall pole, which we know to be the tree. So then lastly, the living mast sways. The tree is going to start swaying, moving. Further sways. It moves even further. With a shout, again, personification. With a shout, it's talking about how just like a human would shout when something goes wrong, or like if you had to break a leg, for example, you'd shout in pain. It's giving that idea to this tree, that as it breaks, as this tree finally collapses, that cracking and that breaking noise you can imagine hearing would be the scream, like a person would scream if we had to break something. So again, that shout is an example of personification. Line 14. Job and Ike. Job and Ike are the names of our two executioners, our two tree cutters. In line 1, your poet Thomas Hardy refers to them as executioners, and now in your last stanza he's named them. So their names are Job and Ike, and they rush aside. They quickly move aside because that tree is collapsing. Readied the end of its long staying powers, the tree crashes downwards. So over how many years this tree has been alive and been growing, all of a sudden it's been destroyed, it's collapsed, and it's not going to live anymore. It's going to now just die. It shakes all its neighbors throughout. That line is very important because it's got a literal meaning as well as a figurative meaning. Okay? The literal meaning would be as that tree collapsed, and because it's such a big tree, the impact of it having collapsed would create ripples, would shake the earth around it. Okay? So it's not going to be a soft little oof. It's going to be a very hard landing that makes the earth shake around it. The neighboring trees, you can imagine those leaves all shaking in the tree because of the impact of the neighboring tree that was now cut down. Okay? So literally, it's going to physically impact those trees around it. But metaphorically, if we're reading deeper into the meaning of our poem, metaphorically, this means that by chopping down one tree, we're going to have a greater impact, not only on that little piece of area, like that literal, the neighboring trees around that one tree that's affected, but we're going to have an extra effect, a compound effect on nature itself. And when you again refer back to your geography knowledge about deforestation, you understand how much of an impact we have as humans when we're chopping down the trees. Things like the quality of air, because we now don't have these trees to filter our air as well as we would have if we weren't creating all the deforestation in the world. And a lot of others. If you go, I'm going to post a link for you as well, a very short, brief article that again tells you a lot of these impacts that deforestation has. So there's a literal meaning there and a figurative meaning. Literal meaning, it's impacting the neighboring trees. Figurative meaning, by cutting down this one tree, we're going to impact nature as a whole. Think again of like your food webs, how if one piece is impacted, the whole food web is impacted. Okay, if one animal's taken away, the whole food web's going to battle to survive. They're going to have to adapt, and a lot of the species will not be able to make it. Same thing's happening here. Okay, one tree collapses, one tree is cut down, it will have a bigger effect. Where will those birds go and create their nests, etc., etc.? And then lastly, your last line of the poem, line 16, and 200 years, steady growth. This tree has grown for 200 years. 2 centuries this tree has been alive. And 200 years of steady growth has been ended in less than 2 hours. How something that took 2 centuries to create and to grow and to maintain has in 2 hours been completely destroyed. How harmful humans have to be able to destroy something that took easily double what most of us will live to. How devastating that must be to destroy a tree that's that old. Okay. So again, your extended metaphor is talking about how the executioners, or how the tree cutters are being compared to executioners, or you could translate it to being like murderers, and how humans are killing nature. Okay, the devastation of humans killing nature seems to be very fitting considering the coronavirus going on. If we weren't busy interfering with all the natural aspects of things and nature's order, maybe this would not be happening. All right, if we go quickly onto your questions, let's go through them quickly in case you don't have them. Number 1, consider the poet's use of an extended metaphor. 1a, explain why the men are described as being executioners. B, discuss how this image is continued with the word death mark. C, how is the image furthered with the phrase broad, deep gash? Number 2, comment on the use of the following words. The first one was stalk. What was the intent and behavior given to this word? Think about the connotations of the word. Okay, we spoke a little bit about it. B, heavy heads, that was talking about those axes. And C, toothed, talking about the chainsaw. C, discuss how the tree has been personified. And A, why is the tree being described as being proud? What are those connotations? B, explain how the description of the broad, deep gash in the side of the tree is an example of personification. C, comment on the emotive impact of the tree being called a tall giant. What sort of feelings are given because of the diction of the tree being called a tall giant? How does it make you feel? What sort of connotations or ideas do you give to that? What emotions is your poet bringing out? And remember, your poet would have done that on purpose, so discuss it in your answer. D, discuss the image of the tree being called a living mast, not just a mast. Remember, a mast is a tall pole, okay, like a flagpole, but a living mast, still growing, getting bigger, more stronger, roots are going deeper. Think about those aspects. So what is discuss the image of the tree being called a living mast in detail. What is the tree being compared to and why? Number 4, does the tree try to withstand being chopped down? Justify your answer. For that one, I want you to please go through and do a quote from your passage. remember, when you're quoting from your poem, you need to, number one, use your quotation marks in the beginning and the end. If you're doing 2 in the front, you need to do 2 in the back. If you're doing 1 in the front, 1 in the back, as well as your line reference. And then number 5, comment on and explain how the last 2 lines have profound meaning. Profound means a very big, powerful meaning to it. A, how long did the tree take to grow? B, how long did it take for the men to cut it down? And C, will this tree be replaced easily? Explain your answer. Think about your poem, think about what we've discussed, and bring in some of your own common knowledge as well. Once you are done with this activity, please take a photograph and WhatsApp it to me. You have my number. We will mark it together on the WhatsApp group. Thanks, guys. See you later.